But in terms of diet control, now, when you were diagnosed, you went through a really interesting period where without this diagnosis, you wouldn't have had the same insight. You became your own guinea pig, and you were like your own lab rat. And this is when you got an opportunity to trial a whole host of different diets. And the first one, I guess, that we're most familiar with before you am accustomed to, the keto, the paleo diet, and we'll get on to the vegetarian diet, which you're on now. But no doubt when you were sitting in that or in the weeks after your diagnosis, you became familiar with the Australian Guide to Healthy Eating. No doubt some of the dietitians there, educated you on that. What kind of principles are we taught at the moment, or dietitians are taught through universities at the moment? And I guess what are the key principles of what makes a healthy diet, or is advised these days for people like yourself diagnosed with diabetes?
Yeah, so at the time I was angry, I was frustrated. I hated the fact that I was just diagnosed with this lifelong condition, and I was not in a position really I didn't want to listen. I just wanted to figure everything out on my own, right? So I was told by, some of the dietitians and doctors that there is a diet that I should be following, and it should contain carbohydrates, and it was a balanced evidence-based approach, to be honest. And at the time I didn't like it. To me, it seemed outdated. It seemed like it wasn't the best way. And I went to Google to find some other answers. I wanted to know what other people were doing, right? Which, led me down a rabbit hole of Googling different dietary approaches to manage type 1 diabetes. And the first thing I found was a paleo diet. A paleo diet was this, silver bullet. It can help you manage diabetes, eliminate grains, eliminate legumes, pretty much no limit on fat intake. Eat as much as you want. Doesn't matter where it comes from. A lot of animal fat, a lot of saturated fat. You eliminate dairy from the diet. So basically you're left eating meat, fish, eggs, vegetables, leafy greens, but low carbohydrate vegetables. So we're talking, you're not really eating a lot of sweet potato and stuff like that. You can have some, but it's mostly like the non-starchy broccoli, cauliflower, Brussels sprouts, leafy greens, lots of nuts and seeds. But yeah, you're not eating oats, you're not eating rice, you're not having bread, pasta, nothing, right? So and you can have some fruit, but it's usually low GI fruit, so berries and stuff like that. You're not really having those tropical fruits. So adopting that approach was pretty beneficial, as you can imagine. So obviously, naturally, I actually lost some weight because I was cutting out so many food groups from my diet that you would eat less calories, right? So that was one of the benefits in the early stages. But on this paleo diet, I was able to maintain very good glucose control because I wasn't putting much glucose into the system. And I was able to reduce my insulin requirements. So at that stage, I was like, this is fantastic. I'm going to stick to this diet. And I did for many, many years. And it was good. It worked well for me. Then I decided to take it up to the next notch, which was the keto diet. And now the main differences there were way more fat than I was having previously. So now 75% of my calories coming from fat. This, in the beginning, also worked very well. Very stable blood glucose control because only 5% of my calories were coming from carbohydrates, right? So this is like literally the opposite, the complete opposite of what I was being told by the dietitians in the first place, which I thought, it's my body. I can do whatever I want. And you can, there's so many different options in terms of what you want to eat. But I didn't really listen to the experts back then because I just wasn't trusting the system. I wanted to go on my own journey and figure it out for myself. So keto diet, also good control. Couple months, really, really good results. The lowest insulin requirements that I'd had since being diagnosed, the flattest blood glucose levels. And I thought, this is it. I found the diet. I'm going to stick with this forever. Fast forward another couple months, so now 4 months in, and every day would get higher and higher. And I'm talking like at some days it was like I was waking up consistently day after day, 12, 13 millimoles of fasting blood glucose, when really I wanted it to be around 5. So what did I do to try to combat that? Give more basal insulin. So that's the insulin I was taking every evening. Sits in your bloodstream for 24 hours as like sort of a background insulin. And what that's meant to do is that should bring you back down so that you have a normal fasting blood glucose. But I couldn't combat this high blood glucose even with basal insulin. It's like the insulin wasn't working, right? Then the insulin that I was the fast acting insulin, so that's the insulin I was giving at meals, you take that as a correction dose to bring you back into the normal range. Again, wasn't working. So I'd give these quite large doses of this fast acting insulin, which you would expect to bring you back down to normal within a couple of hours. Wasn't touching anything, wasn't doing anything.
Right.
So then I was at a point where I was like, okay, hold on a second. I think I might be actually resistant to the insulin that I'm injecting, which is a very scary place to be if you have type 1. If you aren't producing insulin and it's not working when you inject it, you're in trouble, right? That's not good. It's not a good place to be. So fast forward a little bit more, and basically I realized that very, very high saturated fat intake in combination with very low carbohydrate intake, it essentially worsens your glucose tolerance.
Right.
And somewhat, some people call it transient and some people don't think it's pathological, but let's call it reduces your insulin sensitivity. I want to say it causes insulin resistance, but it's a bit of a slippery slope. It, in a nutshell, worsens your insulin sensitivity, worsens your glucose tolerance. So then you go and have even a little bit of glucose, like even a banana. Let's say even after training, you want to have a little bit of a sweet potato or some blueberries. Your ability to tolerate glucose is down, diminished. Right. Your sensitivity to insulin is worse. So now the smallest amount of carbs look like they're causing all these high spikes in blood glucose, which they are, but it's because of the context that you're eating them in. If you eat carbs in a context of high saturated fat intake and you've been low carb for many months before that, well, then your ability to tolerate the carbs isn't very good. And that's what happened to me. I got to this point where I just couldn't tolerate glucose. And I'm not just talking about glucose from my diet, even the glucose my body was producing. So let's say my liver overnight, the reason I was waking up with high blood glucose is my liver was pushing out all this glucose overnight. And what should have happened was the insulin that I was injecting should say to the liver, hey, we're good. You don't need to keep pushing it out. Let's put some of the glucose into the muscle as glycogen. Let's put some of the glucose into the liver as glycogen. You don't need to be pouring out glucose all night. But it wasn't receiving that message. And my liver was just overproducing this glucose. And my muscles, which are like these sponges that are meant to be the biggest glucose sink in the body, where the glucose can go and be stored, it wasn't picking it up. Or if it was, the rate of glucose out of the liver was exceeding the rate of input into the muscle. So at that stage, I sort of went back and I was thinking, you know what? Maybe the advice I was given early on by the dietitians was right. Maybe there was some truth to that. Maybe I should actually listen to some of that. And I found an approach that sort of, it's not quite what the dietitians are recommending because I don't eat dairy. And I there's certain things about my diet that look a bit different, but now it's about, I eat a plant-based diet that's very balanced. If you think about the amount of carbs, protein, and fat that I eat. So, probably 40 to 50% of my calories come from carbohydrate, roughly, let's say 25% from protein and 25 from fat. So the macros look similar to what I was actually told in the beginning, but the foods that I eat are a little bit different, but still, like, now it's balanced. Now I eat oats, I eat brown rice, I eat all these different grains. I eat a lot of fruit. I eat starchy vegetables, non-starchy vegetables. The only thing I don't eat now is meat, but I found a way to replace it in my diet through other ways. But yeah, man, like, it's been a journey of different dietary approaches. And I think the biggest lesson what I learned was the impact of saturated fat on insulin sensitivity is very, very key. And there's many studies that show if you swap saturated fat for unsaturated fat, so if you think about swapping, butter or full fat, like fatty cuts of meat, cheese, all those things with avocado, olive oil, certain nuts and seeds, the unsaturated fats actually improve your insulin sensitivity independent of weight loss. So
such an interesting point you make there. And it brings me back to some more research where I think Matheson, they had this study where they were looking at the number of healthy habits that individuals adopted. And there was 3 different groups. There was normal weight individuals, overweight and obese individuals. And this was based on their BMIs, which obviously isn't the ideal indication of someone's, health status, but they were looking at lifestyle habits such as eating 5 serves of fruit and vegetables a day, exercising frequently, consuming alcohol in moderation, not smoking, and how these factors, adopting more of these healthy habits, how that affected their mortality risk. And what they actually found was that regardless of, whether they were overweight or healthy weight, if they adopted 4 healthy habits, they had a consistent improvement across the board in their reduced risk of mortality, the cardiovascular mortality. The greatest benefit was seen in that obese group, but what they found was that if the healthy group didn't adopt any healthy habits, and the obese group did, then their health status was improved. So it goes to show the benefit of not only just someone's body weight or their BMI, but also the effect of just purely adopting those healthy habits, like you said there. So purely changing from like a saturated fat, like a cheese or cream butter, to something like a monopolyunsaturated fats like nuts and avocado. You can change your insulin sensitivity regardless of your weight status. Yeah.
And I mean, if you looked at me at the time on the outside, you would think, oh, his diabetes must be perfect.
Yeah.
I was lean and I looked like, that I was obsessed with fitness and I felt like I was in great shape. But on the inside, mate, physiologically, I was not in a good place. So again, you can't judge a book by its cover. And in fact, I think now, because of social media and the carnivore craze and how keto's just blown up, I reckon there's probably a lot of people walking around with some level of insulin resistance, or at least they're nowhere near as insulin sensitive as they can be, despite on the outside looking, like a Greek god. So I think that we got to stop just looking at somebody on the outside and going, oh, they must be metabolically healthy or they must be physiologically healthy. Probably not true. I think that you want to get a really good window into somebody's health. Look at those dietary principles that we just discussed. Are they on a high fiber diet? Are they eating a lot of fruit and vegetables? I mean, these messages are so boring for people because people want to hear, oh, you can eat as much red meat as you want and bacon and eggs and red meat every day. Like, that's the message that is popular at the moment. Yeah. But really, the message we should be promoting is the one that, going back to that first discussion with the dietitian, they told me 5 servings of vegetables a day, 2 to 3 servings of fruit, all of these things. And I'm like, really? Is that? And they told me to eat a balanced diet, have some dairy, have some grains. They were probably right. Most people aren't following the dietary guidelines. Let's be honest. Most people aren't. They're either eating a very unhealthy diet or they're eating the extreme diets like we just mentioned, like a very extreme carnivore or keto diet or a very extreme version of something else. Whilst really most of your benefits are going to come somewhere in the middle, getting a bit of a balance. But again, that message needs a new PR team because it's not very popular.
Yeah. If we had to compare it to something, I would say, like when mothers are pregnant, they have a natural insulin resistant response when they're having a baby. When runners eat a high fat diet and then they're training, for instance, like an ultra marathon event, to become fat adapted so they can run at low to moderate intensities for a longer period of time on their fat stores, as opposed to relying on their glycolytic energy systems. Would you say that's kind of a similar response to what's happened with you switching between the diets? And it's awesome that you've been able to experience this because, as we say, I don't think you would have had this opportunity had you not been diagnosed with diabetes. Hey.
Yeah. No, that's actually quite a good analogy. So depending on the environment body is in, or what fuel you're putting into your body, that is going to dictate what kind of fuel you burn. So if you're eating a lot of fat on a ketogenic diet, then yes, you're going to become better at burning fat, but it's going to be the dietary fat that you're burning. So people think it's straight away your body's just going to like rip into fat source, like the fat stored in your body. It's not really true. You're just so good at the fat that comes in through your food. Your body's very good at using that as the fuel, right? Instead of somebody who's eating a lot of glucose, they become really good at burning glucose. So depending on what fuel you're putting in will dictate what fuel the machine is going to be burning predominantly. In terms of overall, let's say fat loss long-term, if you look at low carb versus low fat, very little difference. There's not a huge difference. It comes down to, again, boring, calories in, calories out, energy balance. That, unfortunately, that is the truth. Energy balance is the most important. Some people find it very easy to achieve a calorie deficit eating low carb. Great, you're going to lose weight. Some people find it very hard to do it that way. They gain weight. They might do better on a lower fat diet with higher carbs, and they'll lose weight that way. the common theme is thermogenesis, right? So it's thermodynamics, calories in, calories out. How do you achieve a deficit of calories? And then, as we spoke about just before, independent of calories, if you are eating a lot of fats, are they mostly saturated fats or mostly unsaturated? If they're mostly saturated fats, you're probably not doing yourself the best service in terms of your insulin sensitivity. But if you can sort of swing that over toward the unsaturated, mono and polyunsaturated, you'll have better insulin sensitivity. It is complicated. And the more I talk about this, I think people listening are probably thinking, okay, so what do I eat?
Yeah.
You know, like, how do we navigate this? And I think that social media has done a very good job of confusing people, and people have probably never been more confused.
Yeah.
You know, that's why I'm trying to, like, with my messaging online at the moment, I'm really trying to simplify it and say to people, you know, there are many dietary approaches. Short term, you can feel amazing on probably anything, but what are the scientific principles for long-term health? That is what we need to think about, especially if you have diabetes. Your risk of cardiovascular disease is higher than the general population, right? So if you have diabetes, and we know that saturated fat is linked with cardiovascular disease, if it can increase your LDL and ApoB, then do you really want to be, what's the trade-off? This is the question. If you have a keto diet that's very high in saturated fat and helps you manage diabetes, that is a good thing, tick. But if that high saturated fat diet increases your LDL and ApoB and increases your risk of cardiovascular disease long-term, is it worth it? Is there a way that you can actually shift that into your favor and not be too extreme one way or the other?